Simon Baron-Cohen tells us there are two major elements to empathy. The first element is the cognitive element. That's our ability to understand people's feelings and to take their perspective. The second element is the affective element. That is our ability to respond appropriately to another person's emotional state. Now, I want you to think about a public service that you've interacted with recently. It might be a school, it might be a bus, it might be a hospital, it might be the passport service. If I were to ask you to reflect on the degree to which that experience meant that the public service demonstrated empathy, one of two images might emerge. On the first hand, you might think of the courageous and caring individuals that populate our public service. The teachers, the doctors, the social workers, the nurses, and you might conclude that public sector actually demonstrates quite a high degree of empathy. Alternatively, you may picture the dark side of bureaucracy. The endless form filling, the impenetrable doublespeak, the policies that make so little sense, you wonder how they came to be written in the first place. Kafka so vividly described this senseless, disorienting, often menacing complexity of bureaucracy that even to this day we talk about them, these experiences being Kafkaesque. And we see examples of this every day in talkback radio, in blog pages, in our letters to the editor. So what's going on here? On the one hand, we have emotionally intelligent individuals who are intrinsically motivated to serve the public good. And they work in positions that demand high levels of empathy in education, in health, and in social care. And yet these individuals have to navigate and work through a system of prescriptive rules and regulations and procedures, a system where compliance is the key for accountability, where risks are to be avoided, and innovation and improvisation actively frowned upon. If we were to look at the public sector as we might an individual, with its social interaction, its awkward social interaction skills and communication skills, its inability to read emotional cues, its repetitive, often obsessive routines, we'd actually conclude this individual had fairly low emotional intelligence. And yet this system is the system that is supposed to support these frontline workers, but what it actually does is it grinds them down, and it grinds down their ability to actually just be human. So does it have to be this way? Could we actually have a state that was more empathic, that allowed us to understand our feelings and our perspectives and respond appropriately to our needs? Could we have a public sector that harnesses rather than hinders the innate emotional intelligence of both the people that work inside it as well as the people it serves? Well, I think we should at least try. And I've got three areas where I think we can try and make a difference. The first is quite simply to talk and to listen like people do. George Orwell said that good writing is like a window pane. Communication and language is the means by which we establish understanding, and we can respond to other people effectively and accurately. We need to communicate in plain English if we're to ensure that people not only can understand our message, but we can actually test their response to it and understand how they feel about what we've just said. People with empathy know how to strike up conversations or join existing ones and how to build relationships. And so too, the public service should learn how to find and join conversations that are already happening. And we've heard a classic example of that just now from Khafre. When we have important decisions to take, we deliberate. We talk amongst each other and work out how this decision is going to impact on other people. And deliberative processes are another fantastic way of increasing the empathy of the public service. A great example of this is in the use of citizens' juries, which are being used increasingly around the world on a range of topics, particularly very important and contentious policy areas. In the United Kingdom, the Food Standards Agency ran a citizens' jury on whether or not it should be possible to buy genetically modified food in the UK. 16 people were picked at random, and they spent 3 days hearing testimony from expert witnesses and deliberating with one another about what they thought about this. The entire proceedings were beamed online, and tens of thousands of people actually followed this experiment. if you're interested, I think they voted 9-6 in favour of buying GM food, and we don't know what happened to the 16th person. He abstained. The initially dubious CEO of the Food Standards Agency, who I think had this experiment foisted upon him, later said it was the most important single exercise in public policy that he'd ever been involved in. So human beings are social creatures, and we construct meaning by talking and listening and conferring with one another. And public services ought to tap into that innate ability. So how else can we improve empathy? This is Cassandra Toombs of Tuxedo Cat, some of you will be familiar with. Cass and Brian at Tuxedo Cat take unutilised buildings and convert them into temporary entertainment venues. Their most recent venture from which this photo was taken is outside Electra House, which was one of the highlights of the recent Adelaide Fringe Festival. Hands up who went to Electra House, Tuxedo Cat? Okay, about a third. That's good, excellent, you know what I'm talking about. So, Cass is an expert in navigating the sort of the grey areas of officialdom, working with public servants to find creative ways of overcoming obstacles and ensuring that they meet all the necessary obligations to make venues safe and legal. During the Fringe, inspectors came to call one evening. That's fair enough, that's their job. It was early in the evening. The venue was about 2/3 full. They came in, they found the security guard who was roaming around ensuring that the venue was being used safely. They had a quick conversation about establishing how many people were in the room, in the venue. And their estimates actually were within 5% of one another. So, despite the fact that the venue was well under capacity, it's about 2/3 capacity, as I said, that the security guard clearly had a good sense of the number of people that were in the venue, the inspectors weren't satisfied. 2 days ago, Cass went to court on the charge of breaching her licence. And the reason? Well, the security guard wasn't standing at the front of the venue with one of these in his hand. Now, if we're going to make any progress in getting public services to respond more empathically to people's needs, the second area of development I think we need to do is to make values count more than rules. Now, don't get me wrong, rules are important, but overly prescriptive rules lose sight of the values which called for the rules to be created in the first place. In this case, crowd safety, and replaces it with an obsessive focus on the specific way that that's going to be achieved, in this case, the clicker. We need to find ways to enhance the discretion, to empower frontline workers to use their discretion, to use reason and judgment and assess the situation on its merits. I'm sure the inspectors felt that by being very sort of pernickety about this, they were making the system stronger. But actually, what they were doing was making it less resilient and ultimately more brittle. We need to give people encouragement to constructively rule break if they believe the alternative is superior to the rules that they're there to interpret. So, and I think that all of this actually requires us to think about the way in which we hold people accountable. What we need to do is actually hold people accountable to the quality of their reasoning and not whether they've ticked a box. So, casting the inspectors is a pretty trivial example, but if you think about the tens of millions of decisions that are taken by public servants around the world every day, perhaps you can start to sort of see the potential that we have for drastically changing the relationship between citizens and the state if we rethink about this relationship between values and rules. And this is being explored in some interesting ways around the world. In the Netherlands, the Khafre Brigade get called in when citizens and public services find themselves tangled in a web of dysfunctional rules, regulations, and procedures. They call themselves the first aid of bureaucratic breakdown. They start with real cases, so people actually call up or they hit the Kafka button on a website and they nominate their disquiet with what's happened. So they start with a real case, and the first thing they do is they go out and they assess the situation from the citizen's perspective. They map out the areas of concern, and then they go and talk to the frontline workers and validate the situation and to find out whether it accords with their understanding. They then sit down with both the users and the workers to creatively problem solve potential solutions and to come up with a development plan for further improvement. I think the Khafre Brigade is a fantastic example of the potential for systematically making public services more empathic when you start with users' perspectives. We also know of examples where we've legislated the ability to constructively rule break. In the UK, any school, under the Power to Innovate initiative, any school in the country can write to the Minister of Education and can ask to have a piece of the education legislation temporarily waived for up to 2 years, so that if they believe that it's a barrier to them trying something new that they think ultimately will improve student outcomes. And it's been used a number of times, and one of the most interesting things is when people have written to the Minister and said, we'd like this legislation waived, sometimes they've been turned down, not because the idea is wrong, but actually because the legislation isn't a barrier after all. So sometimes we create our own mental prisons. So if we want to have a state that can better reflect our needs, we need to revisit the way rules are constructed, the way they're interpreted, and yes, even the way they're broken. And the third area I want to talk about is the area of the design of new policy and services. And to quote Charles Leadbeater, the emphasis here is about doing with people and not to them. And this is an Adelaide example for Kristen's rules. Family by Family is a network of families helping other families to thrive. Families who've been through tough times and have come out the other side are recruited, they're trained, and they're linked up with other families who still want things to change. The families set the agenda. They choose who they work with, when they meet, what their goals are, and how they're going to go about achieving them. The emphasis is on sustainable change in goals, in their attitudes, in their behaviours, and also in the number of connections that they make outside their family in their community. Family by Family is one of the initiatives that we've been working on to radically redesign social services. We start by answering questions about what it is that people want before we worry about designing the policies and systems that sit behind that to enable this change to occur. And we believe that good solutions are ones where we enable people to help each other to live better lives. In slightly more technical language, this is a co-designed, co-produced solution. We've co-designed it with families, and they are helping us to produce the solution. Co-design is a fantastic way of enhancing empathy, because by understanding other people's contexts and defining outcomes from their perspective rather than what the system wants, you're more likely to get a solution that works for people. And by prototyping with people, sitting down and testing stuff out, which is what this is, you get to, including the language you use to describe these potential new solutions, you get to fail early, often, cheaply, and quickly, and you get to iterate your way to a more robust solution before you invest millions of dollars in a new public policy service. Co-design explicitly values the emotional response people have to services. Now, hands up, if you can name many services that actually do this. Empathy is integrated into the service because of the way it was actually created. Co-production, using people in the delivery of services, is also another way to enhance empathy. In the case of Family by Family, the service resonates with people because it's delivered by people that they can relate to, people who know where they're coming from, and people who aren't judging them. So 3 small rules or some opportunities, I think, for making the state more empathic. Talk and listen like people do, make values count more than rules, and to do with people and not to them. And I'd just like you to close your eyes for a second, if you can. I'm not going to wait until everyone does. I want you to picture a state that seeks to understand your feelings and perspectives and responds appropriately. A state that talks like you do and listens like you do, that like you holds itself accountable to its values and not mere compliance to rules. a state that both cares about and responds to how you feel about new services and policies. Okay, you can open your eyes. Our understanding of the value of cultivating empathy in individuals has grown massively in recent years. It's time our state was empathic as we are. Thank you very much.